Hi, this is Tiara,
Hello, this is Ali.
and this is the Goddess Vibration. Welcome back. Super excited, still super excited to be here for season two. So, if you are here from season 2, and you also listened to season one, and you stuck by us this entire time, oh my God, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you guys so much. Today, we are going to dive into the world of psychedelics. And Tiara and I have gone back and forth about whether or not to do this because it could be a little controversial. But honestly, I am of the belief that psychedelics help us connect to our true selves. It's just really all about helping tame the ego and really connecting to our true selves. And we're going to dive into a little bit about the science behind it. And, we're going to give our opinions on why we think it's frowned upon. And really, we're going to talk about our experiences and the benefits that we have experienced by doing psychedelics ourselves.
Psychedelics are so fascinating to me because I feel like there is so much that can be done with these. And, a lot of the Native American cultures, not all of them, but many of them, particularly in North and South America, knew of the benefits of these, and especially in nature, and they referred to them as medicine. And so it's interesting how we've come to this place in our society where, especially in the United States, there's like this stigma around psychedelics, and it's even illegal. Like it's a Schedule 1 drug, which is like the most dangerous, the most regulated type of drugs, up there with like heroin and crack. And when you look into what these things actually truly are and the benefit that they have, like it doesn't make sense that these are Schedule 1 drugs. So, I just like my opinion is very similar to Ali's in that there is just so much benefit that can come from using these medicines in a controlled, responsible manner. Now, I know that people like to have their fun with these, and we're not here to judge macrodosing. When I say macrodosing, I just mean like the big dosages that give you like the big experiences that you remember. Um, Outside of that, though, I just think that there's so much beneficial usage that can come from psychedelics, especially in regards to personal journeys, introspecting, and expansion.
Yes, I want to address something real quick because I feel like we have been obviously programmed like drugs are bad for us. And I know for me personally, I carried that stigma. I carried that belief that, you know, these drugs are bad for us. And I'm not saying that they're not dangerous. They absolutely can be, and they absolutely are not for everyone. I need to put out that warning right now, but I can say personally, it took me a long time to bring Tiara around to even trying microdosing because she had the exact same stigma. Like they put fear in us. Like they just say you can't do these, they're mind altering, you don't know what's going to happen, and that's all very true. You don't. That's why Tiara reference controlled environment is the best, but there's still the stigma in society of just like it's wrong, we shouldn't do it. It's illegal. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to get caught. And that is also a big hurdle that you are going to have to get over.
So, I really want to dive into psychedelics and what they are because, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. because there's different types of psychedelics and they have different terms and can be referred to in different ways depending on the culture. So essentially, what we mean when we say psychedelics is we are talking specifically about substances that trigger hallucinations or altered mental states. And so, depending on who you talk to, people might refer to that as being psychoactive, or I've also heard people refer to these drugs as entheogens, which, it's the same thing, but the term entheogen is referencing how these things come from nature and are used to trigger altered states for spiritual purposes. Now, when we say altered states, I'm talking about anything that shifts or changes your senses or your perception or can alter or change your emotions, your sense of time, or your thinking patterns. So I know for me personally, Ali mentioned that I did microdose and I did experiment with microdosing for a couple weeks. I'm going to share a little bit later about what that experience entailed. But I did especially perceive a change in like the sense of time. Like it just seemed like when I was doing it, I would go inward, and then anything outwardly, I would just disconnect from. So the next thing I knew after my first dose, it's been 5 hours, and I had no idea until I look and I'm like, oh God, it's been 5 hours, for example. Now, some of these, and actually, I would say for the most part, a lot of the psychedelics are natural, like they come from nature or they come from trees or fungi or leaves or even animals. So I know there's a frog out there that, depending on how bold you are, some people lick them, some people extract the venom. And then there are psychedelics that are made in a lab. So there's kind of two forms. Now, I know for me personally, when I think of psychedelics, I think of one specific compound called LSD. And, I can't speak for everyone. I just know that personally for me, once I hear the term psychedelics, like that's directly where my mind goes. I don't really know if that's like a programming thing. I don't know if that's like a United States thing. I just know that, like, for me, that's typically where my mind goes. Now, I'm going to be bold today and I'm going to be ambitious and I'm going to try to pronounce some of the scientific terms for these. So please bear with me because I took that challenge on for myself. Um, so LSD is lysergic acid diethylamide. And I didn't know this, but apparently it's found in a fungus. But I also know that it can be synthesized in a lab. Um, Another one is psilocybin, and this was the one that I experimented with the microdosing. This is also the one that people will often refer to as like magic mushroom. So when you hear people say that, they're talking about psilocybin. DMT is another one, and okay, I'm gonna give this pronunciation a go. Dimethyltryptamine, made in a lab, but apparently this is also found in plants, and I think this is the one in ayahuasca. I think. Ali, are you aware if it's the DMT that's in the ayahuasca?
I believe that there's a DMT component in the ayahuasca. I believe so.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought too. There's another one called mescaline, and this is the one that comes from the San Pedro cactus, and then there's another variety that's like a Mexican peyote, and this is the one that I've seen in South America commonly used. There's also peyote, which is a psychedelic cactus, and this is one depending on the culture that natives have used for thousands and thousands of years. And then there's MDMA, and I'm going to be honest with you, I am not going to try to pronounce the scientific term for that one. I was like, I can't do it. But it is the one that I think is like alters emotions. And is this ecstasy? The one that ecstasy is based on?
Ecstasy, Molly, and MDMA are actually they're all like, I guess, in the sister family, I guess is what we can call it, but they are
Okay.
actually different.
Gotcha. So, it's really interesting because I feel like we've seen the societal shift in regards to psychedelics. Now, in many places, it's still illegal and it's still considered these dangerous substances that you shouldn't touch unless you want to destroy your brain forever, which, honestly is ridiculous. But that's the programming that we've been given. But, I was just kind of looking around a little bit in regards to the perception around psychedelics, especially when it comes to like the science and, the clinical settings. And there are actually in the United States institutions that are researching the mental health benefit of psychedelics like right now. And it's relatively new stuff. So for example, I just discovered that there is a Center for Psychedelic Consciousness Research at Johns Hopkins University. Very, very new. But this is just one example of the cultural shift that we're seeing in regards to psychedelics because I think that there is more science coming out showing how beneficial these substances can be when it comes to mental health and healing. Obviously in our country, again, I'm referring to the United States, we have a mental health crisis. And I think it's just the way that we live. I know that the societal programming is a big component of that. I think that we have lost touch with ourselves. We have lost touch with nature. We have lost touch with like the natural way of being. And we have a lot of trauma, and that affects our minds. So, I know that there are people who benefit from medication when it comes to mental health, and I am not bashing that. I know that some of that stuff is a lifesaver for many, many people. But with drugs, you have side effects. And so I think the focus here is well, how can we find something that helps people that might not necessarily have the same side effects that these chemical drugs or substances might have? So I'm just going to do a quick run through of some of the stuff that has come out of this research because I think it is so fascinating. And, for that specific institution at Johns Hopkins University, for whatever reason, they have focused a lot on psilocybin. Actually, I think I know why. Psilocybin is easier to measure and dose than some of the other substances. So they have put a lot of energy into psilocybin. Again, this is the magic mushrooms, and they have found some very, very interesting things. So, I'm just going to share a little bit of some of the things that they have found. So, back in 2006, this is when that whole institution got started, and they were like, hey, we're going to pour $50 million into looking into psilocybin and how it might affect people's minds. That could go either way, but we're going to put money into it and see. And I was like, you know what? I respect that. So apparently, there was a publication that came out about positive personal experiences that people have had when it comes to psilocybin, and that was kind of what pushed the renewal for research into psychedelics. So again, that was back in 2006, which wasn't that long ago. So all of this is relatively new stuff, you guys. They have also discovered that magic mushrooms can help longtime smokers quit when everything else has failed, which I thought was so fascinating. They've discovered that psilocybin can ease existential anxiety in cancer patients. And this institution has actually recommended reclassification of psilocybin to like a prescription based drug. So what they're pushing for is to change it from a Schedule 1 drug where you have things like heroin and cocaine to a Schedule 4 classification where you have prescription medication. And I am all for that. They also, and I was like surprised to see this, But they also say that psilocybin can help tamper the mind's ego. And that is something that they published information about in 2020. So, oh, in addition to alleviating depression. So, as you can see, there is a renewed push around this, and there is like interest at the institutional level, which I think is so huge.
That was all very fascinating. That was a lot of information. Also, I want to point out that I know with like ex military that they have been giving them MDMA to help with PTSD. Like there's been studies proving that MDMA can actually help people with extreme traumas, especially, people who have done tours overseas. MDMA can assist with that.
I would be so curious to know why that is. Is it just like it, because it sets aside the ego, so you can kind of get to the root of some of the stuff and the pain and the hurt that's there? Is it because it's got like this grounding effect? Is it because it just like eases those negative emotions? Is it all of it? Like, I would just be so fascinated to know how soldiers, or in what way they benefited from that. Like, it's just, all of it is so fascinating to me, and I'm a total nerd. So obviously the stuff excites me. But I'm just so intrigued by some of the benefits that we're seeing from these psychedelics.
It is very intriguing, and it makes me question like why these quote unquote drugs are just banned and, made illegal and made like top tier offenses if you're caught with them. It makes me question a lot of things.
Right. And well, we could speculate. And my, my mind likes to go in the conspiracy direction, which is that it is because these substances have the potential to elevate states of consciousness. And we know they don't want that.
Well, of course. Of course, they can elevate states of consciousness, which is exactly why they made them illegal. I mean, no one actually knows that for sure. Obviously, that's the conspiracy theory, but I mean, I don't think it takes a lot to really see like that's why they made them illegal.
Right. And Ali was right in that, like, for me, I kind of always had this fear around drugs. And I don't know if it's just because when I was coming up, I was part of that Dare generation in the 1980s where they were like,
I was
you know,
too.
this is your brain on drugs. You see this fried egg in this pan? If you do drugs, that will be your brain. And my 8-year old self was like, oh no. Um, but I've also heard stories of people who have taken these substances and had terrible trips that have landed them in mental institutions and the emergency room. So I think all of that just kind of combines. And then, obviously, I don't know if I've shared this before, but I was a total square when I was coming up. Like,
Total square.
high
Complete
school.
square.
I was when I was in high school, like everyone was smoking and drinking, and I was just like, oh no, I would never. So I would like go to work and I'd come home and do my homework, and like I was just this straight shooter, and I didn't date and I didn't have sex, and I was just a square. And people would say that to me. They would just be like, oh my god, you're such a square, and I was just like, eh. Um, but that didn't really change much as I came into adulthood. It was
Nope.
only
Not at all.
Allie likes to rub that in my face. It was only recently that I was like, I will open up to the idea of microdosing. And I was really looking for a way to get past the ego and its influence and grip on me, because it's always had like this really strong grip on me for my entire life. And I was like, man, like I need to find a way to get past this. So Ali knew someone who was microdosing psilocybin. And I was like, I'd be open to trying that. And again, I mentioned earlier that psilocybin, it comes from, the magic mushroom, but it's also one of those substances that's easier to dose. So I just found someone who created chocolates, and each piece was like a specific amount of psilocybin. And I started taking that. And I was just like taking one piece every 2 days or something along those lines and kind of experimenting with the dosage a little bit. And I did notice feeling more grounded, feeling less anxiety because, I've always been a very anxious person. So feeling less anxiety and like the influence of the ego sort of shifted away, you know. And I was able to have these profound discoveries about myself and my being and, like some of the things that I couldn't see before because the ego was in the way. And it was actually very, very profound. And I would notice that the more pieces I took, like the more introspective I could become. And I don't know if it's like that for other people. I just know that personally for me, in my experience, that's how it was. Now, I will say that the way I took it, I had to be careful because I did experience side effects. And, I don't know if I'm just someone who's sensitive to substances. I think I am. I'm learning that about myself. But I would get dizziness sometimes, and I would also have stomach upset. Not like terrible stomach upset, but just like a wooziness. And I didn't like that. Now, I loved what the microdosing did for me, and I would be open to doing it again. I just don't know that I can do it in that form. But overall, for me, I thought it was a plus and a positive. And I could see the benefit of microdosing for anyone who wants to navigate through anxiety, emotional pain, trauma, wants to get deeper and introspective. I actually really, really liked it.
I think Tiara is a very good example of being very like closed-minded and narrow-minded towards certain things. I would say that a big part of the work that Tiara and I have done together has been like me just trying to encourage her to expand her mind and expand her beliefs. And Tiara will tell you firsthand, it was not easy. It took me probably 2 or 3 years to finally get her to be like, you know what? I'll try it. Because I think for Tiara, I know a lot of her frustrations came from her ego. It was just her ego was so stubborn, and she was so stubborn that just she was self-sabotaging herself in so many ways with so many different things in life because of her ego. And I was like, you got to learn how to go deeper. And she's like, well, I don't know how to do that. And I was just like, well, have been talking to you about this for a few years now, and what is the harm of trying it? If you try it and if you don't like it, then you stop. But you got to be open to at least trying new things, especially when you feel as stuck and stagnant as Tiara has been.
Yes, and I will say that I have only ever done the microdosing. I haven't even attempted the macro dosing, which is like, again, when you take a bigger dosage for the more profound experience. Depending on the substance, the experience can last from like a couple of minutes to a couple hours. And, I kind of wanted to do like this build up phase, but I think the mistake I maybe made with this was that I was like, all right, I like the microdosing. I'm gonna take this and then I'm gonna smoke weed on top of it, and let's see. Let's see what happens. You never know what could happen. And there are pluses to that, but there are also negatives to that. And I do think for whatever reason, I'm just one of those people that's very, very sensitive to substances. I was open to trying it. I thought overall it was a good experience, but once I added another substance in, that's when I kind of saw like the negative aspects of doing things like this, especially when you aren't being guided or you don't have someone coaching you through it. And I say that because I came very, very close to a state of psychosis. Now, it wasn't, I didn't go into that, but I felt the paranoia. And I actually spiritually called for support because if I had not done that, I would have taken the paranoia on as my truth and lived it. And that terrified me. So at this state, I kind of stepped back and I'm kind of reflecting and looking for other avenues. But it goes to show that when you're doing these kinds of things, like to be really, really careful and you need to prepare and you need to be able to, especially if you're looking for that spiritual experience, integrate it into your life and, learn from it so that moving forward, you continue to grow and expand and become a better person.
So, what Tiara is mainly talking about today is mushrooms, the psilocybin. Um, I've only done mushrooms once. I did it in Amsterdam. Me personally, I don't like mushrooms. I didn't like it was just for me personally, it was just way too trippy. And here's the thing about mushrooms. There are different types or strands, I guess you could say, where it's just like one is meant to be like really like trippy where, you're looking at something and all of a sudden it just becomes a new image. And then there's also psilocybin for introspection, which is the avenue that Tiara took. So there are like different mushrooms for different things. And I didn't personally like the experience. I did try one of Tiara's chocolates just because I was curious and it gave me a headache. I really wasn't a fan of it. I was like, nope, it's not for me. And that's okay. You have to be careful when you experiment. However, you also do need to experiment. And I know for me personally, like when I was experimenting, I had learned that there are things that we could do to our bodies, for our bodies, to ensure that we actually do have a better trip. Now, I didn't know any of this. Like, I was doing it with a friend of mine, and, he had experimented in the past, and he was just like, that there's actually things that you can do to like help prep your body. And I didn't know any of this. And like, eating really clean, eating really healthy fats. So, like, before I say, well, like, one of the best trips I ever had, like, I was eating salmon and I had greens. I made sure that my vitamins were there. Um, when you trip, it's also really important that you stay hydrated. And there's also other things that you can take. Like I know grapefruit extract is also really, really good. So there are certain things that you can actually prep your body just to ensure that it's going to be like a much healthier trip, which I don't think people are aware that you can do that, that you can actually prep your body. And, you want to make sure that you're in a good mental space on top of prepping your body. And I have taken it irresponsibly before, like without prepping the body, but I still had a good trip. I've never actually have had a bad trip. Um, but I know some people do. And so I'm just like kind of giving some tips and tricks about how you can prep your body, how like you really do. I would recommend that you like be in a really good place mentally because all these things are important when you go into like bigger dosages or when you're experimenting and trying these things for the first time. Now, I still agree with Tiara. If you are inexperienced, never done it before, you're you are doing it by yourself, you've never done it with someone who has experience like the way that I did it. Part of the reason why I felt comfortable is because I trusted the person I was tripping with, and I know that they had experience with it. So I wasn't alone. So I'm just saying, like, I like do it with someone experienced, or you do it in a controlled environment with an expert. Those are my recommendations.
Okay, I think all of that makes total sense. And, you know, I plan to take that into consideration if I ever go into a macrodose. But I'm curious to know, Ali, in your opinion, what makes a good trip?
Well, it depends on what you want to use your trip for, really. Like, I think that there are different things that I think a trip is a very personal experience, and I think it just depends on the intention of why you're going into the trip. If you just are taking it with no expectation, then guess what? Anything can happen. And even if you go in with an expectation or an intention, it still might not happen and anything can happen. But for me, a good trip is just, having really good experiences of just being able to connect deeper to yourself. I consider that a great trip. Also, just not being like riddled with, because sometimes, like, you can see images, and I have a friend who had a horrible experience, and she was chasing people and she was being chased, and that's scary. I don't consider that a very positive experience. A positive experience for me is just, going in deeper and finding those answers, but it could also be just having fun with it. Like looking at a wall and being able to make images with your mind, or going outside and looking at the clouds, and literally the clouds are it's a whole creative space. Like for me personally, that was actually one of my favorite experiences, was having the creative space and being able to look at a cloud and being able to, make a dragon out of that cloud, and it's just like whoa. And it just being able to manipulate images in your mind, or if you're just watching something really trippy on TV, and like it's just, your mind goes somewhere else into this creative space where you're just like, wow, I didn't even know any of this was possible. I can say that, like, Steve Jobs, for example, like, he hasn't made it a secret that he does psychedelics. Like, Steve Jobs is one of, like, the most creative, imaginary men, and he built an entire company off of that, and he did it through psychedelics. Also, like, another fascinating thing about Steve Jobs is that Steve Jobs also built Apple, like, based on numerology. Like, he went to India and he went deep into numerology, and it's just like he applied spiritual aspects and so much spiritual concepts to Apple to make Apple what it is today.
You know what? It is interesting that you say that because I am curious to know, like, some of these people that have been artistically inspired to create incredible things, like, how much of that came from the usage of psychedelics? Because I do think that there's this powerful creative potential that can come from dosing. Like it almost like opens you up and connects you to something bigger and grander so that you can extract this creative power and this inspired energy to, channel that into something. And that fascinates me. Like it really does. And I didn't really get too much of a sense of that when I was microdosing, but I did when I was on, when I was smoking, depending on what I was smoking. Like, I do admit that on occasion I have smoked marijuana, and some of the strains can open you up creatively. So, it just kind of goes to show the impact of these natural substances and what they can really do for you and do for the mind. And oh my God, I could just like talk about this forever.
Well, it's a really fascinating topic, and it's not talked about enough. Like I love the
It's
people who just
not.
I just love the people who don't give a shit. Like I know Joe Rogan has talked a lot about psychedelics. I know more and more people, I've seen more and more people on TikTok talking about psychedelics, like that they don't care if they get blocked or banned or the video gets taken down because it's just it's ridiculous the amount of effort they go to remove all of that content to keep us controlled and in a box as possible.
It is. It's insane. But I love this shift that we're seeing in our society when it comes to psychedelics. And I really hope that it continues and it expands because honestly, I think that we're only just scratching the surface when it comes to the benefit that some of these substances can have on humanity, and not just when it comes to mental health issues, but also for those who really want to evolve and ascend and get past the ego. Like being able to get past the ego is huge. And I know for me, it was very, very huge to the point that even with my negative experience, I would still be open to microdosing another substance or microdosing in another way or doing a um, macro level dose, obviously with, coaching maybe and support and guidance because I don't know that I'd want to do that on my own. But I'm still open to using these substances in different ways just because I thought that simply being able to get past the ego was so beneficial.
Can you talk about your experiences with like getting past the ego? Because I know Tiara has consciously tried. It's like the more she consciously tried, just the more frustrated she got because she just felt like she wasn't getting anywhere. And I feel that that is something that would resonate deeply with a lot of our audience.
It's interesting. I actually have talked to my ego directly. Now, I don't recommend this for anyone else. Hey, if you want to give that a shot, you are more than welcome to. But I did directly speak to my ego, and I was just like, "So, ego, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, I can't. Why are you here? Why are you blocking this? Like, what's the big deal?" And the ego would say that it's protecting me or that it's protecting my psyche. And I do think that there's an element of truth to this. And I say that because, I do have a soul that carries a lot of trauma. And a lot of that trauma, I haven't really, it comes from prior lives, and I don't have conscious access to what it is. But once I start delving into some of this mind altering stuff that can shift your state of consciousness, it becomes easier to reach some of that stuff. So my ego would say, like, hey, there's this stuff here. You need to be careful diving into this. I'm making you take a tempered approach for that reason. And I was like, okay, I kind of get that, but like, can you tone it down a little or like something? So what I did is I tested it. I took a microdose and then I went back and I was like, hey, ego, so what's up? Like, are you there? Silence. And I was like, oh, there's something to this. So, I mentioned in another episode that the ego serves multiple purposes. It can protect us, but it can also hinder us. And I think, like, for me, it was just hard to find that fine line. It was always like tilting into the hindrance, you know? I hope that makes sense.
It does. I'm just more curious about, you just mentioned how square you are or were. We're working on it. What was the shift that finally made you say, "You know what? I'll do it."
I think I just kind of had reached my max level of frustration. That I was just like, you know what? What else do I have at this point? Like, I can sit here and continue to be frustrated, or I can try something different. and I was willing to try something different. And it was like what you said earlier. It was like, well, hey, I can try it, and if I don't like it, I don't like it. Like, there's really nothing to lose. Now, did my grandest fear come true that I was gonna ruin my psyche permanently and end up in a mental institution? No, that didn't happen. But I got a little bit of a taste of what that could look like, and it was enough to give me pause. But it wasn't enough to stop me from trying something similar in a different dosage or in a different method or in a different way in the future.
I think that that's very encouraging. And I just want to repeat that this is a very like cautionary episode. Like, we are not telling our audience, like, you should just go out and get psychedelics wherever you can and then just start taking them. No, 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 no. We are absolutely not saying that. We are just talking about expanding the mind to the possibility of outside help that can help our audience or people tame the ego, remove, not remove the ego, just kind of, well, remove the ego for a specific time period. And I also want to just spread caution about taking care of your mind, body, and spirit. You have to go in with right intentions. And even if you go in with right intentions, the warning is it may not always go into your favor. We also recommend that you do find someone, like do it in a controlled environment, get an expert. Just don't jump right into it. Do your research. Do what's right for you. Listen to your intuition. Do what's right for you and your body. And we're just kind of talking about our experiences because all in all, Tiara and I have had really positive experiences, but I do know people who have had bad experiences for a number of different reasons. It just, the drug might not agree with your psyche. And so, again, this is for entertainment purposes only. This is our experiences. I don't want anyone to take what we're saying lightly. I want you to take it very seriously because this is a serious subject, and serious complications and implications can happen. And so for me, I just have to give that warning.
Yes, and I'm glad you gave that because you shared a lot of information that I think could be very beneficial to people who are experimenting or thinking about going in that direction. Now, I do want to say when it comes to like the bad trips or the negative experiences, there are many who think that those can still be integrated with proper support and guidance because I'm of the impression that a negative trip is still a learning experience, and there's still something that you can take from that. Whether it's about looking at your inner demons, or whether it's showing you the need to do, for example, past life regression, or to maybe go into other aspects of your psyche or your soul history to figure out, why that's being shown to you. I do think that with the right support and guidance, a negative trip can still teach you something and you can still take something out of that. I don't necessarily consider my experience to be a negative trip. I don't look at it that way. Ultimately, it for the most part was a positive experience. Now, I've had to reflect a little bit deeper because um, I had to extract what that experience was telling me about myself. But I'm grateful for that. Like, even if it was not the most fun experience, like, I'm still grateful for what it taught me. So ultimately, it's about perspective. And if you, for example, have had a bad experience or bad trip in the past and it's just terrifies you from doing another one, maybe talk to someone about it. See if you can find a way to integrate it and see if you can extract meaning from it because maybe there's something there that you can look at that can shift your perspective and help you find peace in it.
I'm just talking more in regards to people who experience psychosis because it can happen, and I can't speak on experience on that, but I just know people who have experienced it, and it really can mess people up. And as much as much of an advocate I am for it, it isn't for everyone. And you do need to take precautions.
I don't know too many people who have gone into full blown psychosis. Like, I know that people can experience that while dosing. Um, my question is so, the people that you know that have experienced that, do they come out of the psychosis later or is it like a permanent state?
Is it a permanent? I don't know. I don't know.
Very interesting. Okay. I don't know enough about that either. I just, I know I came to the edge of that. And it absolutely is terrifying. It's terrifying. So, I understand why someone would be leery to go and do that again. It makes total sense. It's just, I think even with something like that, that there could potentially still be something there to learn from. Again, just in my opinion.
Yeah, but Tiara, if you're experiencing psychosis, I mean, what are the odds that you're quote unquote thinking straight?
Well, right, not in the state. I'm talking about later once you get to that place where you can reflect on what happened to you.
Right, but this thing about the state of psychosis is that some people can't come back from it. And
Right,
then
right.
what?
And that's the thing. Yeah, that's different. That's completely different. If you can't come back from that, that's completely different. Um, so, you know, cautionary tale there, you guys.
Right, which is why throughout this episode, I continue to spread warning and I continue to say be responsible.
Yes, please do. There is a way to go about many things, and there is absolutely a healthy way to go about, you know, dosing. Again, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have a negative experience. Like, you can't really 100% fully predict or prevent something like that, but there are steps that you can take to reduce the likelihood.
Correct. So we kind of went into this episode not really knowing what to expect. I am still an advocate for it if it's in a controlled environment, if you prep but unfortunately, the reality of the situation is that you could do everything right. You're
Mm,
still not guaranteed anything. And
right.
that's why, we did talk about our experiences, but also I'm just gonna, because I know other people who have done it and I just know what it has done to their psyche. And so as a result, I have to, I just feel as responsible as possible to just give as many warnings as possible. Like, if it's not for you, it's not for you. And that's okay.
Absolutely. So thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode. For those of you who are interested in getting on the wait list for the spiritual community, which launches on 888 portal for August 8th, 2024, you can do so on our website, which is www.goddessvibrationstudio.com. And then on the homepage, there's a link to get on the wait list. So once it launches, you guys will be the first to be notified.
We are so excited for the community, and I hope this episode is enlightening to some of you, if not all of you. I know, like, here I am talking about the positive experiences and how I do think it's a good option. I just have to tell you again, like, you have to do what's best for you. Um, you know yourself, and you should listen to your intuition, and if you are going to try it, I recommend that you do it in a very controlled environment.
I'm in 100% agreement with that. If you want to do that or dive into that, really try to find a great support, like people who are there to coach you or guide you or protect you or keep you from, going off the deep end. Like you really want to make sure you've got a support structure in place for doing something like this, whether it's macro or micro dosing.
Yes, I agree. So thank you guys so much for listening. And our community is going to be up on 888, and we hope to see you all there. And thank you guys so much. And I hope you all have a great week.
All right, thank you guys.